Okay, so I'm just going to proceed to my presentation. Looks like we are having a technical challenge there, but I wanted at least to show my face so that at least you can see the person who is speaking to you this morning. Good morning, ladies. Good morning, distinguished delegates attending this conference.
Morning.
Thank you. Allow me to share my presentation, and also as I do that to basically write on existing protocols that have already been established throughout this meeting. I'm just trying to share the presentation. Just give me 1 minute. Can you confirm you can see my slide?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Like our distinguished Master of Ceremony actually indicated, our Director of Ceremony. My name is Tsitsi Mariwo, and I am the Director responsible for data protection in Zimbabwe. And the Data Protection Authority in Zimbabwe is actually the Postal and Telecommunications Regulatory Authority, which is an equivalent of MACRA. So I'm just going to acknowledge the already established protocols as of yesterday, and I will not forget to thank colleagues from MACRA for giving Potras an opportunity to share our experience with regards to the provisions of our cyber and data protection law, as well as our experience in terms of empowering women within this space of cybersecurity and data protection in Zimbabwe. So on behalf of my Director General, Dr. Machengete, who has been an ally to the empowerment of women, and on my own behalf as well, I just want to thank MACRA for this opportunity, which I believe comes at a very opportune moment, at an opportune time, as we try to actually bridge the digital divide with regards to women's participation in the cybersecurity. This meeting in Malawi to attend physically, but thanks to technology, I'm able to actually join you online. I think from your discussions yesterday, the important thing that we actually need to be discussing, or the importance of this conversation, is that where are the women within the cybersecurity space, despite the fact that we have had a lot of the digital space expanding, as well as the increase in cyber threats around the world, and also the opportunities that are being presented by the fact that we have over 500,000 just in the United States alone of cybersecurity jobs. and over 4 million jobs in cybersecurity that are waiting for us to actually grab that opportunity so that we can participate in this process. I just wanted to say I've been privileged or was lucky to participate in a very important multilateral process within the negotiations around cybercrime at the United Nations, and just want to share with the ladies in the meeting that despite the challenges that we have been discussing, that there is low representation of women within the cybersecurity space, I just wanted to say there is hope because women are participating and women are leading within the cybersecurity space globally. And I just wanted to share with you a story of the permanent representative of Algeria to the United Nations, who led the United Nations ad hoc committee on the first global treaty against cybercrime, which was adopted last week on Thursday. And because of her passion for empowering women and making sure that women participated in this process as much as possible, 43% of women participated in the negotiations on this global treaty against cybercrime, which will soon come into force once adopted by the General Assembly. And the other thing I just wanted to share with you is that women are leading also in terms of the processes around the global crime or crime around cybersecurity, particularly when you look at the fact that the woman who is responsible for issues to do with cybercrime at a global level under the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, who is from Egypt, is also leading a very important and powerful process there around cybersecurity. So my issue is that women have the capabilities, and what we just need is to rise up and take that space, because we can do so. And the executive director of the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime, she's going to be responsible for spearheading the implementation of the global cybersecurity on crime. And she's also from Africa and is at the helm of cooperation internationally in the fight against cyber crimes. And she's also a gender champion who's been calling for gender equality so that we can support sustainable development goals. And coming to my own country in Zimbabwe, our Minister of ICT, Postal and Telecommunications, and Courier Services is actually a woman, as well as our Permanent Secretary is also a woman, Dr. Beulah Chirume, and our Minister, Dr. Tatenda Mavetera, is also spearheading cybersecurity policy as well as strategies in the country. So women are leading despite these challenges. I think the important thing is that we need to keep our focus and make sure that we look less at the overwhelming challenges and put our gaze on the opportunities that are actually presented by this space with regards to cybercrime. I just wanted to say there are so many pathways to joining the cybersecurity space. For example, my experience as a woman in the cybersecurity space is that I'm into policy and governance. I don't have training in cybersecurity in terms of information security and so forth, but I am a lawyer who is trained in law and policy formulation, and I'm participating within this cyberspace as a director, taking strategic decisions as well as implementing policy at that level. So there are also opportunities which are being brought about by the space in terms of cybercrime investigations, as well as cyber protection and defense, and cyber threat intelligence, as well as design, development, and implementation of different tools that women can actually join and participate in all these opportunities. So there is a lot that we can actually do, and a lot of this actually takes us into a space where we need to develop ourselves, where we need to make sure that we are trained, where we make sure that we have the mentors, we make sure that we also have the experience to participate in this process. And I just wanted to say, I think for women, in view of all the opportunities that around this space, where the statistics indicate that 32% of the jobs, there was actually a 32% increase in the jobs around cybersecurity globally. So the cake is just too big. We just need to find ourselves. We just need to make sure that we grab a portion or a percentage of that space of cybercrime. So I'm just going to be talking about a few provisions in our cyber and data protection law in Zimbabwe, which basically has the objective of building confidence in the use of information communication technologies, as well as giving effect to the constitutional right to privacy. So our law protects men, women, and children with regards to issues of cyber and data protection. No one is actually left behind. And our law establishes a supervisory authority which is responsible for regulating personal information in Zimbabwe. And POTRAS was actually designated by the Cyber and Data Protection Act to be the supervisory authority responsible for regulating personal information. And POTRAS was given in several powers or functions to make sure that issues to do with data protection are regulated in a manner that is in line with international standards, also in line with the Malabo Convention. And our law is aligned with the SADC model law on data protection, which I think is the design or the structure with a lot of the cyber and data protection laws within our region. And of the many functions that POTRAS was given is also the function to investigate cases of data breaches, cooperate internationally, which is what we are doing here with other data protection authorities, as well as receive complaints from citizens when there are data breaches and investigate those complaints and make recommendations, as well as advise the Ministry of ICT on data protection issues. So those are some of the powers and functions that were given to POTRAS as the Data Protection Authority. I'm alive to the fact that I have 10 minutes in terms of my presentation, and I'll try to summarize most of the issues with regards to the provisions in our Act. The Act also outlines the principles around data protection, the principle for accountability, issues to do with the principles of integrity, issues to do with the principle of minimization, data minimization when collecting data from citizens. The Act also establishes the rights of data subjects, and Section 14 of our Act provides for a right to be informed prior to the collection of your personal information. It provides for right to object to the collection of that information. It also provides even for the right to deletion where there are errors in relation to the personal information that would have been collected about a data subject. It also provides for obligations of controllers, and some of those obligations are that data controllers are required to put in place security measures, organizational measures meant to safeguard the data of citizens that is actually collected. And the other obligation in Zimbabwe also is for data collectors to make sure that they have appointed data protection officers who assist them in terms of managing compliance with the Cyber and Data Protection Act. And controllers are required to register with the Data Protection Authority and pay a particular license fee depending on the size of their organization to process personal information of Zimbabweans, even non-Zimbabweans who reside in Zimbabwe. And what we also have done is come up with rules in that piece of legislation around cross-border transfer of personal information. And the law provides for instances where data controllers can transfer information across the borders of Zimbabwe. And there is a lot of international cooperation that is going to be taking place amongst on those rules of cross-border transfer of personal information. as well as the need for us to sort of harmonize how we are going to be looking at cross-border transfer of personal information within the SADC region and even beyond SADC region at an African Union level. Our law also provides for judicial remedies for data subjects who feel that their data, their personal information or their privacy has been breached, and the judicial remedy, they have a right to approach any court to seek a redress when that has actually happened. And what we have also provided for in the law is issues to do with whistleblowing in cases where a data controller is not following or not complying with the provisions of the Data Protection Act. So employees or even data subjects are allowed to whistleblow on data collectors that do not abide with the provisions of the law. I also just wanted to say the Data Protection Act itself, the Cyber Data Protection Act, amended our criminal code and brought to the fore a number of cyber crimes which were introduced by the Cyber and Data Protection Act through the amendment of the criminal code. And these cyber crimes, 17 of them, and they relate to issues to do with hacking, unlawful acquisition of data, unlawful interference with data or data storage medium, unlawful interference with the computer system, as well as unlawful disclosure of that data, including even inciting violence or damage to property, sending threatening messages, cyberbullying, and sending false data messages about someone. There are also provisions around crimes relating to sending or disseminating racist or xenophobic material, as well as identity-related theft, and transmission of intimate messages without consent. There are also provisions there around cyber crimes to do with production and dissemination of child pornography, which are also prohibited within our national legislation. What I just wanted also to mention is that the cyber crimes are investigated through the Zimbabwe Republic Police. Porters can come in as a friend of the court to assist with dealing with the matter as a friend of the court. And we are also allowed as porters to actually approach the courts where we feel that an institution, private or public, is actually not complying with the provisions of the Cyber and Data Protection Act. So these are some of the provisions that we have in our law. But I just wanted to share with you our journey with regards to data protection in Zimbabwe. And this will be my last slide, as I note that my time also is almost running out. In Zimbabwe, in 2023, we established the Data Protection Unit, which I'm heading as the Director of Data Protection. And the structure in Zimbabwe is such that the Data Protection Unit also incorporates the Computer Incidents Response Team. So issues to do with cybersecurity fall under the Data Protection Unit. And then when the department was established in 2023 under Portras, we then we hit the ground running in terms of implementation of this act, and we started participating in multilateral negotiations on Convention Against Cybercrime, and we then also had a team of 14 staff members joining us in July 2023, and immediately we called the ITU to assist us with an assessment of our cybersecurity posture as a country, and the ITU came on board and assisted us in terms of setting up our computer incidents response lab within at national level. And in July 2023, we started national sensitization and awareness programs throughout the country, where we were raising awareness on the Cyber and Data Protection Act so that the citizens can understand the rights that are provided for. Data controllers could also understand and appreciate the obligations that they have in terms of the law. And for the first time in Zimbabwe, we held our privacy symposium in January 2024 of this year. And in March this year, we had our functional and fully running computer incident response lab, which was set up with the assistance of the International Telecommunications Union. And as Zimbabwe, what we have done also is that we noted that a lot of the training around data protection and cybersecurity is done internationally, and there is nothing wrong with that. But what we have done is we have said, let's have a homegrown solution where we can develop a data protection train the trainer, which is homegrown, or a training program on data protection and cybersecurity, which is facilitated by Zimbabweans, which Zimbabweans can participate locally through partnership with the university. So as Potras in March 2024, we partnered with the Harare Institute of Technology, and we launched the first data protection certification course in Zimbabwe, and we believe that it is one of the few homegrown data protection courses that are being offered in Southern Africa, even on the African continent, because a lot of this training is actually done through the general data protection regulations. It is not localized to the national setup. And then so far, when we started in March, we have trained close to 70 data protection officers, because when we started, we didn't have trained professionals within our ecosystem. And this is one way we have started building the capacity around data protection in our nation, by training data protection officers through partnership with institutions of higher learning. And this training is actually open not just to Zimbabweans, but even non-Zimbabweans. So those participating in this conference can also log in on the Harare Institute of Technology website and register to participate in this training, which is homegrown, looks at our context as Africa, and looks at also the principles, yes, that are applied internationally. And then what we have done also is, because there is a lot of misunderstanding and misconceptions about this law, we have drafted implementation guidelines to guide data protection controllers, to guide data protection officers in terms of implementation of the Data Protection Act. And we've come up with a number of guidelines which we are publishing for implementation by data protection officers as well as data controllers across all sectors of the economy. And we also sharing that as the Data Protection Authority, we were very pivotal in the negotiations in August 2024 this year, the last 2 weeks, in the adoption of the first United Nations Convention against cybercrime. And what we are doing in September, that's our next enrollment for this data protection officer training, and people are free to actually participate or to enroll for this training. And this is basically what has been our data protection journey in the last 12 months. When I was appointed the Director of Data Protection in Zimbabwe, over and above coming up with our strategic plan, it has been a journey where without commitment, it would have been difficult to start rolling out this program around data protection in Zimbabwe. And without also many as allies, our DG has been very supportive. It would not have been possible to do so. And I think also the most important thing is the issue that there was a lot of mentorship and exposure that I got so that I could actually participate. I had mentorship from other data protection authorities, such as from Ghana, from Uganda. The commissioners there were very helpful. So I see the linkage between what we are discussing here, that women in cybersecurity need to mentor each other, which was done by the Data Protection Commissioner of Uganda, as well as even the information regulator in South Africa. We had a benchmarking in South Africa where the information regulator also assisted me in terms of appreciating what we were supposed to do to roll out the cyber and data protection journey in Zimbabwe. So my message basically is that to women in this meeting, despite the fact that I didn't train in information security, I have been able to occupy a portion of this cyberspace within the policy and governance structure, where I'm leading the strategic direction around data protection in Zimbabwe as the director responsible. But also the message is that, yes, challenges are there in terms of how we can participate, we can increase our participation as women within the cyberspace. But our focus should not be on those challenges, because the more we look at those challenges, the more difficult it becomes. We should actually put our focus on the opportunities, the massive opportunities that are presented by this space, so that we occupy and manage this space. Women are actually better managers. There is so much chaos within the cyberspace, and our participation there, increased participation there, will actually bring order within the cyberspace. So I encourage every woman in this meeting, I encourage the girls, upcoming girls who want to participate within this space, that fear not, the opportunities are massive. Like I indicated at the beginning, the statistics are that 4 million cybersecurity jobs are there worldwide. What you just need to do is get the training, get the area where you are interested in. Are you interested in policy and governance? Are you interested in investigating crimes? Are you interested in cyber threat intelligence? Just identify an area where you want to embark on where you want to focus on. Educate yourself, look at the mentors around that area, make sure that you get exposure around that area, read around that area, and develop yourself into a consultant. Empty yourself in terms of understanding and appreciating that area that you have chosen to focus on. And you realize that before you know it, you also be a force to reckon within the cybersecurity space. I just want to thank Magra for the opportunity to participate in this process. I'm still online throughout the day, and if there are any questions directed at how we have started as Zimbabwe and some of the challenges, I didn't want to speak about the challenges because my participation, not just at the multilateral level, they've actually demonstrated to me that the opportunities are massive. We just have to go out there, grab the opportunities, find a field where you are interested in, focus on that, train yourself, educate, build yourself around that area, and you realize that before you know it, you are actually a cybersecurity guru, and you are doing well in your field. I thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Titi, for your presentation and words of encouragement. But before we let you go, maybe we can get comments or questions from the floor. I'll take two.
Thank you for a great presentation. My name is Dismas. In reference to judicial remedy for breaches of the provisions of the Data Protection Act, to what extent or what deliberate steps have been taken to ensure that the judiciary is sufficiently capacitated to preside over these issues and make the right decisions that are informed by the technology that is being abused or the provisions of the law? How have you actually prepared, aligned what you are doing? How has the judiciary in Zimbabwe aligned what they should do with what you are doing, to make sure that there is sound judgment and decisions that are made by the judiciary are sound based on the law?
Thank you very much. Just to confirm that I'm here, I'll be online throughout, and if there are questions that will keep popping up for Zimbabwe or for Zimbabwe to share experiences, we have a lot to share with the rest of our SADC region and the rest of Africa. But due to time, I just had to summarize the issues. But it's as if you already know what's in our strategic plan with regards to data protection. Fortunately, we got a partner. The International Telecommunications Union has actually partnered Potras to train the judiciary in November this year. So from the 25th of November, Potras is going to be training in partnership with Professor Tana Pretorius as well as the International Telecommunications Union, to train the judiciary on the provisions of the Cyber and Data Protection Act as Zimbabwe, but also looking at the international principles and frameworks around cyber and data protection globally. So that is already in our plan as Potras. Right now, we are already starting to train the police officers, because we have picked that when we were invited as experts in court, in the 12 months we have started as a department, we have had several cases where we have been invited to be to the courts to assist with the expert advice or expert witness advice around Cyber and Data Protection Act, because it is a new field within Zimbabwe, and I guess also in terms of implementation within the SADC region. So what we have done is noted that there are a lot of challenges with regards to appreciation in terms of the drafting of the charge sheets, the issues around cybersecurity, around data protection. So we have embarked on a training also of the police officers, and we are hoping this will culminate in the training of the judiciary in November, after we have trained the police this coming September. So that is also in the pipeline. And thank you very much for that very pertinent question. We noted indeed this is a new field. Our law is new. It was only promulgated in December 2021, and we're still developing the jurisprudence around data protection and cybersecurity in Zimbabwe. And indeed, it is critical that as the law is being interpreted, the interpretation is done in the right manner with an informed judiciary. We are not saying they are not informed, but it's critical that the concepts, the practices globally as well as regionally are shared amongst the judiciary, and we have that in the pipeline. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Titi. I think we'll let you go now. Thank you for being with us and for highlighting that women are better managers and they shall bring chaos to the cyber sector, as well as highlighting the diversity that is cybersecurity. That is not just a technical, but we are also, you can also be a lawyer and get into cybersecurity. Let me invite our next presenter on the same topic of digital laws, and her name is Joyce Mloani. She's from Botswana. She has over 25 years of working experience practicing in the courts of Botswana. The MACRA in Botswana, which is the Botswana Communications Regulatory Authority. She works closely with the computer emergency response team in Botswana as well, which is our Malawi set here. So Joyce, the floor is yours. May I ask our technical team to assist Joyce with her presentation?
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Joyce Wema Isamulwani, like I've been introduced. While the technical team is starting, I just want us to stand up for a moment, all of us. Right, do we remember what we were told yesterday, that we are brands? I'd like you to look at your neighbor and say, you are a brand. And you want to now say to yourself, I am a brand. And I am the maker of my own destiny. Give yourselves a round of applause. Please be seated. So let's see if we can get this going. Right. The challenge with being short is always getting the mic right. But I'll make up for it in content. Now, before I start, let me just put this on. I'd like to shock you a bit. Yes, I'm a lawyer by profession, but at the same time, I'm a bit of a tech geek, I confess. Let's see if this is going to come up. Mr. IT, don't move. Okay, let's regroup and start again from a different angle. We'll come back to this. I'll go back to my presentation. Okay, even that's not coming. Okay, let's start something different. How many of you on social media platforms? Raise your hands. How many of you are on more than 3? 5? Okay, how many of you read the terms and conditions? Okay. You just click accept, 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 right? Okay. Now that's where the lawyers catch you for these multinational entities. In terms of passwords, how many of you use the same password for all your social media platforms? Fess up. Some of you do, right? And how many of you use your mother's name, your dog's name, your father's name, a friend's name, husband's name, child's name? Some of you do, right? Now the reason why I'm saying all of this before I go into all the legal stuff is that we as human beings and our behavior is actually the weakest link. We open the doors to everything that happens to us, okay? So I'm going to introduce you first to Madam Legal What. This is where the law and cybersecurity meet. We have to have laws that can actually help us protect and navigate. We have to have laws that help us protect and navigate the landscape to ensure that we do not find ourselves in a situation where all our data is out there. Those pictures with besties, the ones we were told to delete yesterday. Now, my presentation is not going to be long. I'm just going to do some highlights. The pleasure of working with wonderful women like Titi is that when she comes first, she basically covers most of the stuff. I'm going to do a brief introduction with some facts and figures. I'm going to cover an overview of the Botswana National Cybersecurity Strategy and highlight some of the key legislation that exists in Botswana. Now, we all know what conventional crime is, what it used to be. Pickpocketing, right? House theft, burglaries, physical. You know who the perpetrator is, right? It's the guy down the street. Now, cybercrime, it's not necessarily about the guy down the street that you can identify. This is somebody using a computer or a computer system to hack, to infiltrate, to steal your data, and basically commit all sorts of crimes, including stealing your identity. Cybersecurity is therefore the ability to protect and defend the use of cyberspace from cyber attacks. Now, facts and figures for Botswana. Population 2.6 million. Yes, we can smile, it's about 10% population of Malawi, right? Right. Now, in terms of that 2.65 million, we have a broadband penetration rate of 123%, which means everybody's connected if you look at the figures, but using mobile broadband, which is basically internet. And out of that population, we've got 1.3 million Facebook subscribers. What does that tell you? In terms of Malawi, do you have the stats for that? It means it's a lot more. Now, at a global level, we've got 5.4 billion internet users as of April this year. Facebook, 3.7 million, 3.07 million. Instagram alone, 2.4 billion. And TikTok, who are the TikTokers in the room? You're part of this stat, right? 2.05 billion. But what does that mean? It means when you're on all these platforms, you are leaving a digital footprint. It's not like a footprint in the sand that can get swept away or wiped away by the tide. It stays forever. So what you put on there, it'll come back to haunt you. How many of you have received from Facebook 5 years ago and they give you all these pictures? And you see the one that's not so flattering. You forgot about it, it's your picture, but Facebook remembered and reminded you about it, right? And those pictures, some of them are before your glam up, right? So you don't want people or your besties to see that, but they'll see it because Facebook reminds you, hey, your data is still here. So because of that, we need to be really careful. We need to be mindful. We need to understand that what we put out there stays there for a very long time. Information such as your name, what you do, birthday party, situation now. You're basically telling anyone who's got bad intentions against you, this is where I am. How many of you actually switch off your location? Very few, yeah? Because people put situation now, put a picture, but the metadata, which is the information behind that picture, talks about where you are, the time. With face recognition, it can, if you tag others, it even shows who else is there with you. So you could be sitting here now, you've left your apartment, locked up, situation now, BICC. Somebody knows you're here, they can break into your house. Data, what you do with it is important, yeah? So let's now go into the laws. I thought first let's do that. Now, for a country to know where it's going, it needs to plan. Cybersecurity has been around for quite a long time, but in terms of the African context, many countries have only recently come around to understanding that we need a strategy. A strategy is basically your game plan, where you're gonna go, how you're gonna go there, with whom you're gonna go there, what it's gonna cost. All of that is important, right? The same way like you wake up in the morning, you decide I'm going to work, you plan, what am I going to have for breakfast, what am I going to wear? Strategy is basically that, planning out, forging where you want to go. Now, the strategy that we have in Botswana has 5 key main pillars, and it is aimed at the public to raise awareness and build capacity to safeguard against cyber threats. It's also aimed at industry stakeholders and government to ensure that they're always prepared to prevent, defend, and act against any cyber attacks. And it's also very important to establish measures that will ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability. This is not a new concept. We heard it yesterday, isn't it? CIA, not the American CIA, cybersecurity CIA. Now, the main objectives of the Botswana NCS is to achieve a secure and resilient cyberspace. How? First point of call is always to ensure that there is a proper legal framework in place that can support a secure cyberspace. In terms of the strategy as well, there was the intention to establish the Botswana set, BW set, to protect critical infrastructure. I'm going to run through some of this because it's the same theme with most countries. This is where their strategies are aimed and focusing on. The second one was to enhance cybersecurity capacity and capability, both regionally, internationally, and locally. And me being here is also part of that. It's building capacity. And I'd like to say thank you to Macro for that, because it's from each other that we learn and grow. I told you being short is a problem, right? Okay. Now I can't see my screen. I need to do this. Anyway, promoting cybersecurity awareness is really key, because you cannot defend or protect yourself against what you don't know. We're also focusing as a country in our strategy is to foster cybersecurity research and development. As a profession, we don't have too many cybersecurity professionals. We've got IT professionals, but there's a difference between IT and cybersecurity. To break it down to you, cybersecurity is basically an IT specialist on steroids. It goes a level deeper. We're also, as a country, here to ensure that we enhance stakeholder collaboration. Cybersecurity is not a national problem, it's an international problem. And as Tsitsi made in her presentation, we're actually very happy that after many years of hard work, we are now having a convention that will globally deal with issues of cybercrime. And the crux of that convention is actually to ensure cooperation. Without cooperation, we've lost the battle. Now, why have cyber laws? Okay? Cyber laws are there to make sure we're able to respond to cyber crimes. We need to also ensure that we improve organizational security, and also to protect people. You, me, the girl next door, granny in the village, the laws are there for your protection. And the reason why it's important to have them is that without that, where do you run to? Over the years, we've seen new crimes come about because of the internet usage and cyberspace. Back in the day, my lady, offenses such as revenge pornography did not exist, but they exist now. Because there's that gentleman that you love so much, and he says, just send me that cute smile of yours and make sure I see a bit of this. You send it, right? You're in love and you think, oh my goodness, he's complimenting me, he loves me. And then you break up. And then that picture is seen by everybody. That's a crime. So ladies, those nice I love yous, they don't always last forever, so be careful. Yeah. And I'm not saying the ladies are not guilty. Some of you do it as well. So even gentlemen, be careful. Now, the first act that we have under our cyber legislation is the Cybercrime and Computer-Related Act. Just as what Tsitsi said, you find that within the SADC region, we tend to have more or less the same laws that cover the same offenses. So I'm not going to become a boring lawyer and go through the sections. Nah, we're just going to talk about the principles behind them. But what is important here is the jurisdiction or the ability of the court to actually prosecute these crimes. Now, when it comes to cyber crimes, the courts in Botswana are able to deal with the cases if those acts are committed in the territory of Botswana, if they're committed by a national of Botswana in another territory, and if that act is also an offense in that other place, then you can be prosecuted. Whether you're on a ship or an aircraft registered in Botswana, our courts will also have jurisdiction to deal with you. And then now, even if it's committed outside of Botswana, but the effect is felt in Botswana, our courts will also have jurisdiction to deal with that offense. Now, Part 2 of the Act actually lists the various offenses that are there. And some of these things never existed a few years back. So our laws had to change. How many of you know somebody who has been cyber harassed, cyber bullied? It happens, right? And it's not a good feeling. So these laws are there to actually protect you from that as well, because back in the day, our penal codes did have harassment and bullying, but that was physical. Cyber basically means you could be minding your own business here in Lilongwe, and somebody sitting in Zomba, who you probably don't even know, is busy harassing you on your own phone. So these laws have been done to ensure that the current life that we're living, the life of technology, we're still able to protect our citizens. We also have the Data Protection Act. It's been in place for a while. We do have an established entity under the Information and Data Protection Commission. Unlike MACRA, it does not sit with us. Thank God. But, but we work closely with them, because at the end of the day, it is through our ICT that most of this data is sitting. So we have a fabulous relationship with the commissioner, who's a woman, by the way. So yay, women, we're doing the things. The act has been in place for a while, but has been in transition. We now have a new bill that came out just a couple of weeks ago that is actually amending the act and putting stronger measures in place. It's now making sure that the act also has extraterritorial applicability, which is basically similar to the principles of the Cybercrime Act. It also imposes heavy fines. And I'll try and see if I can translate this into dollars so it can hit home in a kwacha sense. The administrative fines have now increased from the maximum, which used to be 1 million pula, to 50 million pula. So we're talking about approximately just over $4 million as a penalty. Not just that, for multinational companies, the fines can hit 4% of total annual worldwide turnover. My lady, this is heavy, but it's necessary, because information is the new oil. So we're making strides and moves as a country to ensure that when we say we're going to protect you, we don't just do it by prosecuting, but we make laws that are deterrents in themselves. Okay? And now, an interesting thing here that has happened is that personal financial information is no longer classified as personal data. People will ask why. Well, at the same time, besides cybercrime, we're also dealing with issues of corruption. And corruption still uses, to some extent as well, ICTs. So you find that the laws as they're evolving are now marrying into certain areas where there's relevance, and where you find that you cannot have one law that is contradictory to the other or does not actually achieve the objective of that law. Now, terms and conditions that you don't read. This is what it actually says. The moment you say yes to that app, whether it's TikTok, whether it's X, whether it's whatever, in there, you have basically consented for them to use your information. And you find that most of these companies have now merged, whether it's Instagram, whether it's Facebook, which other platform, they're all interrelated. And what do they do from that? They're actually monetizing off your personal data that you have through consent given them. Haven't you ever wondered why that when you're on TikTok and you just watch one particular video, the next few videos are similar? Do you know why? Because you've basically fed to them, I am interested in this by watching it. So the algorithm behind that basically says, ha, this person likes this. So you're going to continue receiving the same type of feed. And behind that, there's adverts from which they make money. You now become a target, and then become social engineering. You just want to buy one pair of Nikes for your son's birthday, and for the next 6 months, you're going to be receiving Nike ads. So the data you give is also used against you to determine how you behave as a consumer. So let's just be mindful as we go about our daily world when we deal with social media and the world of cyberspace. Now, the Communications Regulatory Act is basically the act that gives us as BOCRA the mandate to oversee the communications sector. And the sector I'm talking about is the ICT space, which includes internet service providers, the broadcasting space, both radio and television, the mobile space as well, and also post and courier. All of that is communications. So we have a very broad mandate, but guess what? Our act says nothing about cybersecurity, because it came before the time when cybersecurity was something that countries paid attention to. But guess what? We got creative as BOCRA. The act does say that as the board, we can do anything reasonably incidental or conducive to the performance of any of the above duties. And the duty being to protect and promote the interests of consumers. So we've given it a wide interpretation. And we've decided that we are going to take it under our belt because we have the mandate over such a wide sector to ensure we protect our consumers at all levels. Now, the next act we have is the Electronic Communications and Transactions Act, I think similar as well to here in Malawi, which basically allows for e-commerce and electronic signatures. Back in the day, if you wanted to sign a contract with somebody, there's the typist, print it, bind it, messenger, deliver, 2 physical witnesses present, 2 copies sent, couriered back. And what did that do for business? Slowed it down. So this act basically now allowed for the recognition of electronic commerce, where you can now have e-signatures, where you can sign things online and it's binding. So that was done basically to facilitate the movements in terms of how we work in the world. Now, this act is now going to be repealed. As the country goes towards digitalization, we realize that we need to do a lot more and also cater for those incidents that were not necessarily covered by previous legislation. We also have an interesting act called the Electronic Records Evidence Act. For the lawyers in the room, when we got trained many decades ago, there was the rule called Best Evidence Rule, which means bring the original. If it's not there, my lady will say, no, you haven't proven your case, dismissed. But things have changed. Electronic evidence is now accepted and admissible as evidence before court. But our act is interesting because it then has a requirement on us as the regulator to certify the process through which this electronic evidence has been derived. But this is where it's important for the judiciary to also be trained. They are now interpreting the act to mean that us as a regulator should authenticate the evidence, which is not the case. The act actually says we authenticate the process through which such evidence has been derived, not the evidence itself. So what has now happened? Many systems have not been certified, which means lawyers are using this act to say, this cannot be admitted as evidence because it hasn't been certified by the certifying authority. So for me, this is one of the acts that we need to try and deal with, because it might actually lead to a travesty of justice where your evidence is sitting on a WhatsApp platform. And as a regulator in Africa, I have got no ways of actually certifying the process of the extraction and generation of a WhatsApp message. So these are some of the dynamics of where we now need to be more active and ensure that as we delve in the world of cyber, we have the laws that actually support the practicality of ensuring justice. Now, I did mention earlier that we became quite innovative as BOCRA, because our act did not give us a specific mandate for cybersecurity, but it did say we must protect consumers. So because we do have a set that started off as a communication set, and our job is to protect consumers, we said there's no law, but we can create industry guidelines, practices, and come up with our own charter that actually defines how the set is going to work. And that's what we're doing. They're making the law now, but the law will find us already operational because cybersecurity does not wait. In a nutshell, that is Botswana in terms of the laws and legislation pertaining to cybersecurity, data protection, and e-commerce. I don't want to take too long, but I'm hoping now that if I click where I want to click, that you'd manage to see what I want to show you. I don't know why. Because what I wanted to put up was actually a threat map, a live cyber threat map, which can actually show you second by second the number of hits. I wish you could see my screen, but just this morning, from this morning, there have been 5 million cyber attacks. South Africa has been hit, Botswana, Kenya, Namibia, Egypt, and as I'm speaking now, if you could see the screen, it's now going to 5.1 million. I wanted you to see this. Maybe if there's a way I could share this. But you're young and tech people. If you just look for threat map, try. There we go. Thank you. Now, for me, whilst most people spend time on TikTok, as a lawyer, I spend time on this. Why? Because it gives me a real picture of what's happening in the world. My lady, are you looking shocked? This is what's happening in the cyber world as we speak. You will see that there are attacks happening from all over the world. Right now, in the US, they're about 7-8 hours behind, but they're busy hitting the world. Japan is 7 hours ahead, but they're busy hitting the world. But the reason, there we go, Zimbabwe has been hit as well. Singapore, Japan. This basically tells you how big the problem is. So yes, what role do lawyers have in cyberspace? The perpetrators of these need to be found. They need to be prosecuted. And the gavel needs to go down on them. This is the reality of our world today. And if you look on the corner here, you would see that the top malware types, they're hitting mobiles, they're hitting education system, healthcare, and government. Now, for some of you who are still in school, imagine if your center was hit. You've written your exams, and they've wiped out all that data, and you can't graduate. This is what they can do. Sitting in a jungle somewhere, they don't even know who you are, but at a tap of a button, that can happen. Imagine you go to the hospital, and you know the hospital knows that this is my medication, it's a refill. You get there, and that record does not exist, which means the hospital cannot give you your medication. What happens? It can affect your life, right? Governments, when governments get hit, it's not just about the airports. Immigration, I believe someone said something about. You can't travel. You can't renew your license. You can't do anything. You can't get your ID. And as many countries are also going through elections as well, imagine if the voting system, if it's electronic, also gets hacked. So cybersecurity is not about just a career. It's not just about you as an individual. It's about all of us, because it can affect all of us. And the consequences can be really, really, really dire. It can cost a life. So having said that, ladies and the few gentlemen who are here, cybersecurity is a lifestyle. It's not just a profession. Cyber hygiene is an essential. When you use your gadgets, make sure you update them. Do the patches, update the versions, because it's through that, if there's a vulnerability, you will get attacked. Your data would be leaked. Just as you wake up every morning to brush your teeth, get ready and go to work, Do the same with your devices. Sweep them clean. The same way you clean your houses and your kitchens, clean your devices. Yeah? How many of you, when you go to restaurants, the first thing you ask for is Wi-Fi password? All of you, right? Because you're saving your data, right? But guess where hackers go? To that same Wi-Fi. Because they know you're just openly going to go in there. You probably haven't patched anything, you haven't upgraded. So just as you're using it, so are they. And word of advice, when you do go into Wi-Fi zones, try and understand how safe and secure, but please don't do any banking whilst you're in public Wi-Fis, because how do you say thieves? Is it kawalala? Yeah. Yes. The thieves and the thugs can be the person sitting right next to you. You think they're having coffee, meanwhile they're in your phones. So ladies and gentlemen, just as we look after ourselves and our houses, let's look after our devices. Let us educate each other about what it actually means to live in this cyber world. And remember, you are a brand. Thank you.
Can we get another hand for Joyce, please? Thank you. Our next presenter is online. Are we set? The technical team, are we set? Tomorrow we will have a presentation on cyber hygiene, and we shall adopt cybersecurity as a lifestyle. Isn't that right, ladies? Ladies, isn't that right? Thank you. Is he online? Our next presenter is Mr. Miranza, an ally, CEO and founder of CTM 360, and the visionary behind developing the digital risk platform stack. He's going to present on cyber resilience for modern day security, programs, and external perspective. Mr. Miranza, are you online? As we are waiting for Mr. Miranza, I think it was yesterday where Mr. Nsonda had talked about how our legal and regulatory frameworks are lagging behind.
Hi, could you hear me?
Oh yes, we can. We can hear you.
Hi everyone. Apologies for the inconvenience. Mr. Mirza he is joining the call, but there is some connection issue from his end. So he is requesting if we can wait for 5 minutes.
All right.
That would be nice. Thank you so much. Again, apologies for the inconvenience. You'll be joining shortly within 5 minutes. He's trying to reconnect.
Okay, fine. All right. We shall wait 5 minutes for Mr. Miranza to join us. I think yesterday, Mr. Nsonda had in his presentation on emerging technologies, where he was speaking on IoTs and AI. He had spoken about how the law is lagging behind. The cyberspace and technology are moving at such a fast pace that the law has to catch up. Hearing today's presentation from the two amazing women, and we are yet to also hear from Malawi's perspective, I think it's safe to say we are in good hands. Right, ladies? It's encouraging to see that at the helm of these authorities are women, and they're bringing sanity to the chaos that is the cyberspace. So I think we can give them a hand. I'm definitely impressed. Here at Makra in Malawi, our Director of Legal is a woman, and then I'm seeing at Bokra as well, and I'm seeing in Zimbabwe as well. I think Africa is doing amazingly at inclusivity, but also as women, reading their profiles, it's evidence that we can achieve so much more, because these women just did not demand a seat at the table. They came with the powerhouse and said, I need to be here and make these decisions. So I think, I hope the young ladies here, you have been encouraged, and that whatever you decide to do, you know that cybersecurity is a big aspect of that.
Good morning, everyone. I think we have really started at a very good note, and I'm also quite proud of my sister, Titi, Joyce. You know, you become a family in this field, and the beauty is it should be a lifestyle. And sometimes, as women, we underrate ourselves. The power that we have, the impact that we can have. And I'm glad Joyce spoke a number of things that we do without really being aware. I remember I was somewhere else, and believe you me, it was an international conference of experts, and there was some people who ran, Google was there, and these big social media houses were there. And somebody says, yeah, you people, you actually, you always are stalking us. Nowadays, once I open something, even when I'm talking to my friend, I mention an old friend that I haven't even seen. The next thing I'll see a friend request is coming through. And sometimes I mention something to my friend that I'm, while speaking on my phone. The next thing I'm getting advert of exactly the same thing I was talking about. And actually, they were also, they were actually attacking the mobile companies. That these mobile companies are the ones who are eavesdropping on our conversations. And the response that came from all the big techs was, no, the mobile operators don't eavesdrop on your conversations. But when you are getting, nowadays there are so many applications, so many competitions that are happening on Facebook. They say, okay, when you join, you see yourself maybe looking different, younger, older, with a family. And in most cases, what happens is when you are joining, or for you to participate in that competition, or to take part in that, they always ask, you should accept that your mics, you're giving access to whoever is operating those platforms. And mind you, these platforms are third parties. They are not even Facebook. They are also third parties. So what we do normally is we just click consent, just because you want to do, we don't even read. But what we have done is we have given consent for those particular companies to now. TikTok, actually it's a must. For you to get on TikTok, you give away your rights to your, for them to access your microphones, your contacts, and other things. That's why when you get, and those people, it's a business, and I'm glad that Joyce said that when you are talking like in the digital world, data is the new gold. It is the oil. Whoever has data and who leverages with AI and Internet of Things and other things, definitely they'll be on the go. I always give an example again that this is always highlighted on, if you look at who's the most, if you look at the biggest networks, the richest networks in the world, richest hotels, richest taxi companies, you see that it's Uber, Alibaba, networks is Facebook and WhatsApp. They don't even have a network like the physical infrastructure. Alibaba don't even have big shops. Uber doesn't even have a single taxi. Airbnb, even despite being the richest hotel, doesn't even own a single hotel. They've leveraged on data and technology. That's why we say data is the new gold. And that's why you now be seeing a lot of people talking about data protection. Because data protection, as my friends have actually, my sisters have actually said before me, it's about protecting your personal data. Because they know that it can easily be abused. They know that you are always giving out information. You are selling yourselves. Facebook is not free. You are actually paying through providing your data to them that they can aggregate, they can process and sell to third parties to give you, to directly market to you and sell you what you want. And I remember there was a time I visited Facebook offices. They were able to challenge me that anyone who's on Facebook, it wasn't a big room, but it was quite a reasonable room. They say that if they had to pile like information, like print out, almost people, there's nobody who can have less information that would not fill that room. That's how much they know you. And there's this feeling that sometimes when we get online, we think nobody knows because of Alazigoba. Believe you me, the internet is the worst. Somebody, the metadata, once where you are, especially if you use your location, somebody knows exactly where you are, what websites you're accessing, what make of phone you're using, and everything. And somebody is out behind the screens is actually processing and aggregating data about you. There is artificial intelligence now. They can be able to process and know exactly what you're doing. So the free digital print that we leave online, we need to be careful. What sort of digital print are we leaving? Be careful. Somebody knows exactly where you are and what you are doing. I'm not saying that it's wrong, but I'm just saying that just know that this is happening. Let me, when they're ready, please. Okay. Thank you so much. We'll talk more about it, but please mind your digital print.
Thank you, Chair Togozani. I think Mr. Miranz is ready. Hello. Mr. Miranza, can you hear us? Are you online, Mr. Miranza? We are waiting for you. I think he's having technical difficulties from his end. Okay, fine. Mr. Miranza will join us after tea, so we are breaking for tea now. Tea, we have got 2 serving stations at the back and in the next room. So you can choose any serving station. We'll break for 15 minutes and we'll be back here at 10 minutes to 11.
Late, I'm in Manila. So good morning, everybody.
Good
My
morning.
name is Mirza. I have been given the opportunity to talk to you about cyber resilience this morning. It's about women in cybersecurity, as your chapter is, which is very close to me also. I'll just let you know that in my staff, in my company, CTM 360, I think around 40% are women. And so many of them are leading my threat analyst teams as well. So a little background about me. I'm the CEO and founder of CTM 360. It's a technology company. Three flags right now. The three flags are because I've been doing technology business for a long time. I was born back very early time, and I graduated in 1983 as a computer science student. I started my first business in 1985. It was selling personal computers, where I used to bring in components and assemble them and sell them in the Saudi market. This eventually I pulled back from after the first Gulf War, and my drive has been now to build some software technologies, and that I've been trying to do since 1995. 1997, I saw viruses coming in by email, and I decided I need to do something on information security. So I have been a system integrator as well while I tried to build my own technologies. Anything I did in the beginning, everything failed. But over the last 10 years back, when I built what is the philosophy which I will talk to you about today, that worked. So during the journey of mine where I was a system integrator in information security, I realized that this is a war which my technology, and I because if you look, let's say, 15 years back, you will maybe come to know of a large breach happening once a month. Then go forward 10 years back, it was like once every week. Go forward 5 years back, then it was like every day there is one breach. Nowadays, it's multiple major breaches every day. That's why I put up this, like, so many news comes out every day. What is it signifying to us is that something is not right in terms of how we are trying to address it. So much so that ransomware, which has been growing over the last many years now, and on a daily basis there are organizations hit with ransomware. People are now trying to say that it should be accepted as normal business. So such a crime to such a degree is now becoming a cost of doing business. That's not right. I disagree with that. And I think the industry needs to change. When you look at such statistics like 2024 will be a volatile year for cybersecurity as ransom. So what is happening now is suddenly the ransomware groups are booming. There is ransomware as a service. And there are so many ransomware groups that they are just now out there and nobody can actually stop them. What is happening is that globally, people, organizations are spending more and more on trying to do security. But the expected losses or losses which we see currently just keep on growing. If I try to do a linear graph only, because the rate of growth of the losses is much higher than the rate of growth of what we are managing. Look at this graph, go forward 10 years, you have completely lost the war. How to visualize this? Because keep in mind, this growth is actually exponential. So we have sort of already lost it. To visualize it, have a look at this. This is a city, looks like a normal city. Yes, there may be crimes happening, physical crimes, but the city remains like that over time because we are managing the crimes. If the crimes were growing exponentially in a city, city will become like this very soon. So in the physical world, we are able to manage it, but this is my prediction that in the logical world, if we don't change the way we do security, we are heading towards this. And there is a talk about it a lot that people talk initially used to say cyber security, then the whole thing became cyber resilience. I am saying now it is cyber survivability. How will you survive? Where is the future going? And keep in mind that it's not just about you. You can spend $1 billion on your security. You can become as hard, but you are still connected. We are moving forward to this completely digital connections with anybody and everybody. So you are fully dependent on your vendors, your partners. So I have this term which I normally say, you are as secure as your vendor. At the same time, what you need to realize is that the resilience, which I'm calling now survivability, is about becoming a harder target. Even if you are in a normal city, you want to put in the right controls in your house so you don't get robbed. The robber will look for an easy target. Same thing in cybersecurity. If you want to start today, then you're thinking how to become a harder target. Now, let's talk about what I see as the challenge or problems which I think need to change. A problem well stated is a problem half solved. And that is the first issue in cybersecurity. We are not able to frame the problem rightly. We need to figure out to describe it rightly. For example, if I ask you, what is the difference between IT security, information security, and cybersecurity? Even the gurus of the world will struggle and people will argue a lot. So we don't even have a standardized way of defining the problem. So this is one challenge. Then, at the same time, look at what we were talking about data as the oil and everything which is data. There is so much information, there is so much digital transformation being pushed on the world, which is very disruptive. Very rightly, the lady just before the tea break was mentioning that everything is about data. If you look at WhatsApp, and I ask you what is their business is not instant messaging. Facebook is not social network. Google is not a search engine. All of them are data company. They have created these hooks, these gimmicks to get your data. So everybody, and they make money out of the data, but they have to come up with a smart way of thinking how to get your data. This is where you need to also understand how to leverage from the data. I have this in front of you, two terminologies, fintech versus techfin. I'm pretty sure everybody will know fintech and nobody will know what is a techfin. Fintech is a bank which is optimizing through technology. It is not really transformation. It is just using technology. We have been doing that from a long time and we'll still keep on doing. But we need to be aware that the real people who will bring in this transformation are not the industry which is applying technology. It is rather somebody which is a technology company based on data and then converting into your business. TechFin is when a technology company becomes a bank. There was a talk about all these big companies who don't, like Uber, doesn't even own a single taxi, but it is the largest ride company. or Booking.com doesn't have a single asset in terms of a hotel, but it's the largest hotel company in a way. Because they were all thinking data from the beginning. They were thinking technology from the beginning. When a data company becomes a bank, you should know Elon for that purpose. But before Elon, sorry, I wanted to mention about also Alibaba. Alibaba have WePay, and they had WeChat, which they converted into WePay. And that WePay company became so big that the government had to move in and tell Alibaba, you have to have a financial company for it. Then they created Ant Financials for that reason. The comparison is that it took only 20 years for WePay to get 800 million customers, whereas the largest retail bank, Citibank, it took them over 200 years to get only 200 million customers. That's a big difference. The next biggest paying company, which will become a largest platform in the world very soon, is Twitter. For the banking industry, they're not yet realizing it. Elon is smart. He bought Twitter for that one reason only. People yet don't know, but earlier this year, he already announced it. X transforms social media into a financial ecosystem. You will see it soon, and not only you will see it, you will become one of their subscribed members who will be using it. This is my prediction. Let's see what time will say. So now all this digital transformation also requires security. Anything, be it your digital optimization or digital transformation, security is by far the most important piece. But knowing all that, yet the problem is people do not, business is not looking at security. It is easily understood by answering the simple question, why do we have brakes in the car? Normally people will say to stop the car. That's the wrong answer. Brakes enable you to drive fast. Similarly, adequate cyber security, information security will enable you to do your business much faster. But that's not yet understood by businesses. Business always puts cybersecurity in the back seat. It's an afterthought. That's where regulators and all the regulations which were being mentioned earlier come very, very important. Because to do security, the driver is really regulator, regulator, and regulator. I will today try to give you a different perspective of that as well. Number three, the third challenge. Security is being done since the time I used to do system integration, which I started back in 1997. It is called the strategy of defense in depth, layered security. You have to have the parameter security. You have to have your network security, your data security, your endpoint security. You have all these layers of security. That defense in depth alone is not going to work. That's number three. Now let's go to challenge number 4, which I think needs to change. That is the way we have defined the roles and responsibilities in the organization when it comes to security. Easy to see that although management does not really give importance to security as such, whenever a breach happens, the scapegoat is the CISO. CISO gets to be the blame. So all the ladies who are getting into this game of cybersecurity, please be aware and appreciate that also, that it is the understanding of the people that they are going to point out to the security team as a culprit, and of course along with that the vendors. But this is still a very exciting field. It keeps me awake and young all the time. Yet we will try to figure out how these roles and responsibilities should also change if we want to bring across better security. So these 4 things which I am saying needs to change for the reason that the way we are doing what we are doing today will not do. There is also, with my due apologies, there is also this thing which is being said, which has been said from a long time back, that it doesn't work if you try to do the same thing again and again. In fact, it's called insanity if you keep on trying to do the same thing and expecting a different result. We have to change. I have this is my philosophy based on which I even built my technology. We need to change the definition. We need to change the driver, why we are doing the security. We need to change the defense mechanism and the strategy, and we need to change the duty, the roles and responsibility. And I'll try to quickly take you through these 4 pieces. Let's start with the definition. So definition of security, you can see that in 2015 when President Obama and the Chinese president met up, they were all debating what is the definition of cybersecurity because they need to make the laws and regulations between them. Here is my perspective, my definition, my differentiation between IT, information, and cybersecurity. IT security should be all about the end user. They have to enable the end user similar to the police. The job of the police is that people, citizens, can go around anywhere, anytime in the city without any restrictions, feeling secure. So the IT security mission is enable user. Comes information security, which is not about users, it's about assets, similar to the military. People may die, but they need to secure the national grid, they need to secure the airport, and so on. So information security is about assets. Cyber security is not about people, it's not about assets, it's all about attacks and the attacker, similar to the intelligence agency, where they're looking outside in where the hacker or the attacker is and neutralizing them even before they launch the attack. And then when the attack happens, their threat intelligence should assist both IT and information security. This model is not being done rightly. This is my humble view. We need to change that. Next comes the driver. Currently, I told you that regulator is a primary driver, but there are other drivers. There are 3 different drivers today. One is business. Business is supposed to drive security, and business should be looking at what is of priority and then trying to come up with creating a baseline security for it, implementing the controls and so on. That's one approach. Second is, which I told you, the regulator, the frameworks where all the regulator bodies, be it within your organization, the national level or industry one, they have all these frameworks people need to adhere to. And the third one is driven by threats. What is the current threat? So out of these 3 approaches, my humble opinion is we should be driven by threats. We should rather change it around. We should say, you know, I will use the framework based on what threats are there. Not that I go around trying to implement the whole framework at the same time. I will look at the current threats. Very nice articles about it. Control-based versus risk-based cybersecurity. Why are you running around trying to do all the controls all the time? Rather look at the risks, and for those risks, focus on those controls, which is similar to say, why move cybersecurity from compliance-based risk to risk-based compliance? Doing that will make you resilient in terms of a harder target. I'll explain this a little more in my next slides, but let me go on to the third piece. I said to you that there's, and that to understand the third challenge of mine, you have to realize that threat intelligence today is not adequate. They're focusing too much on IOCs. To understand that, let me tell you this, that if you look at any global threat reports, you will normally be driven by IOCs. Whereas if you look in a bigger picture, if you try to look at the cyber kill chain is by Lockheed Martin, where they divided each attack into 7 steps and 3 phases: pre-compromise, compromise, and post-compromise. This is where the total focus is. The current threat intelligence is all about IOCs inside the firewall. I bet you that most of you don't even know what is the meaning of IOE, IOW, and IOA, which is outside the firewall. Indicators of exposure, indicators of warning, indicators of attack. This is about you. These are the data points about you. Whereas IOC is not the data point about you, it's about an attack which happened somewhere else. And mind you that these IOCs keep on changing 10 times in a day. Based on that aspect, if you're looking at inside the firewall, these are the layers of technology which you normally implement. There are more than 30,000 vendors in that who are providing you all of these different variations of technologies. But when you look outside, the ones which is IOE, IOW, IOA, it only started picking up recently, over the last 5 years. when I started building this model of mine, this is what I conceived as DRP stack. I built this model. I called it offensive defense, which should complement the defense in depth. And you can only see around 100 vendors in that space globally. And we are fortunate because we came up with this idea. We built all of these pieces together from the very beginning. Now let's look at the fourth piece, the roles. For that, I'll touch back again on the aspect which I said, that you need to look at the evolution of security and understand it better. There used to be this word IT security in the mid-90s. People were not even using the terminology information, let alone cyber. Only around 2000, we started using the terminology of information security, and beyond 2000, it became cyber security. Same thing tells us that the roles have been changing. Security, what you do today, was only reporting to IT before, and that's it. Then when it became information security, it started reporting to the CRO. It became a risk piece. Now, as cyber security is most of the time also reporting to the COO. Yet, it is all mixed. Whatever is IT, whatever is information, whatever is cyber security, this is all in one hat. I'm saying let's change that. This is where it comes in that
Mr. Haben paid 65,000 for domain renewal. Mr. Haben, remember.
Somebody talking to me?
Haben plus technologies.co.mw. Yeah, I want to consult another bank invoice here, 65,000.
Hello, Mr. Mirans, are you still there? Can you hear us? I think we've lost Mr. Miranza again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. You have 5 minutes to wrap
I don't
up.
know what happened. I was lost. Okay. I'll go back to my talk. Can I know where did I cut off?
We can hear you.
Can you tell me where did I cut off? What was my last slide?
The previous slide where you are splitting the CISO role.
Okay, good. Then I'm okay. So the role of the CISO should be split, which is now also being discussed, and I base it based on these aspects of security. Security is a strategic, tactical, operational, and technical. All these four should be considered when you are looking at the roles of the security. And here is my view. The security should be, IT security is a Chief Technology Security Officer, which is based on IT Asset Register. Then you should have a separate role of Chief Information Security Officer, which is based on Information Asset Register. And then there will be a Chief Cyber Security Officer, which is based on the Digital Asset Register. If you notice, this is the same thing which I was dividing. IT security is about end user, information security is about the assets, and cyber security is about the attacks and the attacker, which is dependent on the digital asset register. Currently, this is not being done. We are not maintaining these three separate registers, these three separate missions. And this is my humble view why we are failing, which need to change. So I'll just take 5 more minutes in terms of, I was talking to you about the threat intelligence piece. We are being bombarded with threat intelligence feeds. There's too much out there. So remember I talked to you about IOCs. Basically all these threat intelligence feeds bring in a lot of IOCs, which I mentioned to you that they change 10 times in a day. Now look at that. That hash value or an IP address or a domain name which you want to block in your environment because it impacted somewhere else is changing already. Whereas TTP, which is the technique of the attacker, has not changed. So why are we not focusing also on the technique part? If we can block the technique which the hacker is using, I am calling it a kill switch. I also call it the silver bullet for ransomware. So a ransomware, we need to understand, and I'm just going to quickly focus on the different pieces of ransomware, and then I'll tell you what I'm saying, how we can help ourselves to block ransomware. Now, ransomware classifications. You may not know that conventional ransomware was only by data encryption. When people started having backups, so the scammers, the hackers decided to do double extortion. They will encrypt the data and they will take your data out and they'll say, you know what, now if you don't pay us, we will even publish the data and we have disrupted your work. Still, they felt a lot of organizations were not paying up, so they added a triple extortion. A third one, they started DDoSing you at the same time. So this is the evolution of ransomware. But nowadays, because of the very thing which one of the lady before me was talking about, PDPL and all those laws, now the ransomware guys are only relying on data exfiltration. Why? Because if now they have the data, let's say you are the organization, your data for your customers' data, and they make it public, they publish it, then they will be fined by the government and their customers can sue them. So ransomware has gone back really to this. So in the this year, before the end of it or the next year, you will only see this type of data exfiltration. The ransomware will only rely on this. And then we have also got fake ransomware where people pick up your documents from somewhere outside and claim that they have your data, they will publish it, else you pay up. There are other type of things which I don't want to talk about. Let me just skip because I'm late on the time. How do you want to stop a ransomware? I talked about TTPs, the ones which I'm calling repeatable. If you look across all these ransomwares, the most being used is Lockbit and then Clop and so on. What is common in them in terms of a technique? Command and scripting interpreter. These are the common techniques, and Windows binary is being used. This Windows binary being abused is not only by ransomware, but most of the malware as well. So question, what are we doing about it? Most of the places, nothing. Why are we not addressing it? If you look at the data exfiltration, which I am saying is the future of the ransomware, you can look at the tools which are being used by different ransomware gangs, and you will see the tools which are common across them as well. And those tools are again using certain Microsoft binaries. If I look at the kill chain of a ransomware, I will see in these phases what binaries are being used. And I can select the binaries which are more common and call them my kill switch and do hardening for it. No more tools required, no more fancy technologies required. Just go back to your system and make sure that these binaries, because most of them are not essential for every desktop, you can just block them. You can just stop those services. So these Windows binaries, I'm going to just talk to you about one of them. In the kill chain phase, on the delivery time, PowerShell is one of the binaries. Look at how you can block it. My threat intelligence is all about guiding organizations how to harden their system by ensuring that these binaries cannot be exploited in your organization. then you have to think about ransomware, other things as well. I'm sorry, I've gone beyond time. I hope it's making sense what I'm telling you guys. Here is something which you can do, because all my platforms, I'm also providing a community edition. You can simply go on to my website, subscribe, take access. The IOE, IOA, IOW relevant to your organization, pre-populated without any configuration, will be visible to you on my platforms. Thank you. I hope my talk was useful.
Thank you so much, Mr. Miranza. A hand for Mr. Miranza. Thank you for taking time out. I think we'll let you go. And we've learned a thing or two. Isn't that right, ladies? All right. We are running a bit behind schedule, so we are going to continue with our presentation on digital laws. Our next and final presenter is the chairperson of this conference. She's the Director of Legal Services at MACRA. She was heading Consumer Affairs Unit at MACRA as well, before heading the Legal Directorate. She has also been leading in the development of various digital laws here in Malawi, including the Communications Act, which we are currently using as MACRA, where we draw our mandate, and the Electronic Transactions and Cybersecurity Act that helped in the establishment of the Malawi Emergency Computer Response Team. Currently, we are also in the process of developing various digital laws, and this amazing woman is sitting at the helm, spearheading this development. Thokozani Chimbe, the floor is yours. A hand for Thokozani, please.
Once again, good morning, everyone. My simple task this morning would be to make a presentation on the data protection laws in Malawi. I hope you are aware that for the first time in Malawi, we do now have a dedicated Data Protection Act, which was passed last year by Parliament, but was assented by the President in January. But because our laws require the minister to appoint a commencement date, the minister appointed June 3rd as the commencement date for this Data Protection Act. So my humble duty this morning Then we do have the Electronic Transaction and Cybersecurity Act, which is also currently in force. But recently, we have also developed a couple of digital bills. When we talk about digital laws, we're talking about all laws that deal with the digital space that are handled by MACRA or that we feel are very relevant to how we do our work. So currently, we have developed a cybersecurity bill, which the final bill has been presented to our ministry for onward submission to Ministry of Justice. What the cybersecurity bill does, it reestablishes the set. It talks about the critical infrastructure and its protections, the obligations, the need for MACRA to be setting standards, and stuff like that. So anything to do with the cybersecurity posture of Malawi, it's in the cyber security bill, the institutional establishments and other things. I hope one day we'll be able to talk about it, maybe in the next Women in Cyber, because by then we are hoping the bills will now become acts. Then we have also spearheaded, facilitated a bill called the Cyber Crimes and E-Evidence Bill, This one now is a bill that is providing for different offenses that can actually happen online, because we realize that our penal code cannot cover most of the crimes that are currently happening. And if you heard in the morning, Joyce was also speaking about how, as lawyers, the courts always, in the past, they always insisted on what they called the best evidence rule, which was like you had to bring original copies of anything that you have. If you have a case before the courts, you are relying on a letter that was written, you have to bring the original letter. That was the best evidence. If you are bringing an alternative, there's a whole procedure that has to be followed. And sometimes the courts would actually say, no, the copies that you are bringing, or this one cannot be relied because where is the original? But if we talk on the internet, what is the original? I'll just give you an example. If you are writing an email, you type an email, you click send on your laptop. What happens? I know you know, I hope everybody knows what happens, because your computer, my computer, everyone here, as long as you are you are connected, your computer is also part of the network, the internet. It's also transmitting other messages going to wherever you are, based on how the internet works. So what happens, immediately you send click, it breaks down your whole message into ones and zeros, and they take different routes. 1 0 will go this way, the other one will go that way, and because of the addressing, the IP addresses and everything, wherever they are going, they're able to know the location, because we talk about addresses. I'm hoping next time we'll talk about the domain names system, how it works. It all manages to direct the messages despite them being spread so that they go to the same destination. So once it goes, they meet, they aggregate again, where if I'm sending, let's say, to Justice Ntaba, then everything, once it reaches there, they'll come up again, form the message, and she'll be able to read. But what I'm trying to say is the original is what was on my computer. The rest are copies. What she gets are also copies, because the original, what I wrote, remains on my laptop. So when you are in court, do you have to bring that laptop with the original message? It's almost impossible. Why can't you use the copy that she got? So because the rules of evidence also have to change. That's why in the cyber crimes and electronic evidence, you see there's the evidence part of it, because it recognizes that electronic messages should also be given the same legal recognition and validity as we do the other physical document, as long as they fulfill the purpose for which we want them to do before the court of laws. So there's a whole process. I hope we'll talk about it next time. But suffice to say, we also have another bill interesting that I hope some of you, I'll see you there. It's called the Digital Innovation and Entrepreneurship Bill, which basically is providing for funding. There's a whole fund for young people, anyone who has an innovation, how they can be supported by this fund, from the inception of an idea into having a startup, into something that is commercially viable. So this, again, because we recognize that innovation is key if we are to be successful in our digital transformation drive. So currently I can talk about these 3 bills that are almost being processed, but we are also reviewing our Communication Act because it's 2016. Technology is moving very fast. We need to review. We'll also be reviewing the Electronic Transaction Act, but we'll talk about that when they are acts. But today I'll talk about the new act, which is the Data Protection Act here in Malawi, which is the first ever dedicated one. We did have a few sections in the electronic transaction. Data protection of your personal data. And I think they had said personal data is anything that directly or indirectly identifies you as a person. So the Data Protection Act has nothing to do with WhatsApp messages, no, it's about data that identifies you as an individual. Tokozani Jimbe. What are the things that ineyo muntu atationa would know what this one is talking about Tokozani? So that's what we talk when we are talking about data protection. I already said I think at some point I said, why do we need to fuss about this data? And Alliance Amenobanga present, if you notice, everybody is talking about data. And as we say, data is the new gold. But the most important data is the data of individuals. You and me, that is being processed by makampani siana without even us knowing how much they have collected, what they're doing with the data. And if not properly used or misused, or if they had to lose it, it can cause a lot of harm and injury. And it has caused, in other cases, a lot of harm and injury to the individuals. So that's why it started with actually all data protection laws, it started with a treaty. The first one ever that was done in Europe, it's called the General Data Protection Regulation. So it's a European convention. And in Europe, they recognize that, okay, there is Facebook, there is WhatsApp. Alliance, for you to do anything, you have to input your own personal data. And if there is a leak or there is a breach, and you know, there was also talk of ransomware. And if you notice, most ransomware attacks, what they do is they target mostly data yosiyana komanso amakonda kupanga target personal data ya anthu amene anthu ayenayo that is in a company. And amaitenga and then say, okay, if you want your data back, give us ndrama mwakuti mwakuti. So because if you don't tikupanga and publish, and zakazukuchitika in so many countries. I remember last year it was the British National Health sector. People started another information, big hospitals in UK, NHS, and obviously NHS and matenda, matenda private. Then somebody started leaking because it was a ransomware attack. You would want to have your privacy. You don't want anyone to know who madwala. I'm just giving an example. So this is why in Europe they said, no, there's a lot of data that is being processed by different companies and entities, and there is need to protect the right to privacy of individuals. So it's based on the fundamental constitutional right of privacy. Here we do have that under Section 21 of the Constitution. It recognizes the right of privacy. So this one is based, its foundation is on the right of privacy. They recognize that as people, we do have some privacy and we need to protect this privacy. And again, we are all going online. For us to be confident enough to transact, we need to have trust and confidence in what we are doing. So that's why there is always need to make individuals feel, okay, data yanga, whoever I'm giving it to, they won't abuse it. Once there is that trust, it's very easy for people to be transacting online. And again, because the GDPR, which is the European Convention, it has got far-reaching consequences. Normally, laws ambiri, they are territorial. If you have, even here in Malawi, our laws normally are supposed to be for Malawi, applicable in Malawi. But what the GDPR said, they looked at how everything is happening online, where you can be in Malawi, but be able to order something that is in Europe. You can be in Malawi and be able to post something, somebody waku Europe nkuona, they said these, when you are online, if you are doing any business, as long as it's targeting somebody who's in Europe, and there's a breach that happens, it doesn't matter where you are. For them, it is a crime that has happened in Europe and you'll be liable. And because Europe, it's a block and it's big, and now they are developed, it forced everyone to comply with the GDPR. But at the same time, others also realized that, okay, what Europe was doing is really important. So most governments decided that we also need to start protecting our own citizens from this processing. So I would like to emphasize again that what the Data Protection Act does. Can we move to the next slide, please? What I think I've already talked about. The next one? Okay, I'll talk about that, but the next one? Yeah. What the Data Protection Act does is, first of all, it defines my concept my definition which are very critical. The first one is a data subject. When we talk about the data subject, we are talking about you and me, the owners of the data, who can be identified by the data that is being processed. So when we talk about data subject, we are just talking about the individuals whose data is being processed. The next one is the data controllers. Put it in layman's terms, but what it does, it says a data controller is anyone who has ordered the data to be processed, who needs the data to be processed for their whatever they want to do it for. I'll give an example. There's my friend Shupi there. I also work with the telecom, so it's easy to talk about Airtel. For Airtel, for you to have a SIM card, Airtel, you give your details. Airtel demands that you give one SIM card registration. So it's Airtel that wants the data to be processed. So the data controller is Airtel. I've just given Airtel, right? Chimozi banki. Banki ndimeni National Bank and Standard Bank, for you to actually have an account, you need to give us your personal data, because you cannot open a bank account nkunena kuti personal data sindibereka. Uwena bekhala ndi dzina lako, ama kumachokera kuti your age, your sex and other things. Those are all sets of personal data. Now, because it's the bank that wants the data, it is the bank that is a data controller. But there's also a third one, a processor. A processor is any third party who has been engaged by the data controller to collect the data on its behalf. Let's say the bank or Airtel, they want to collect the personal data, but they don't do it on their own. Abanga outsource maybe a company, everything happens online. So the platform, because I'm the national bank, but when the platform is run by another company, which is actually what happens in most times, they are one managing the collection of the data. So apagatiwa, they are called processors. So that's the distinction that actually is being brought in by the Data Protection Act as well. And it also defines processing. Processing is basically anything, collecting, storing, altering, just sending personal data, as long as you do anything around personal data that has been collected, it is called processing. So when I'm talking about the Data Protection Act, what the Data Protection Act is, first of all, it defines these concepts, then it goes ahead. Basically, it adopts the principles that are in the GDPR. That's what most countries have done. But while we are adopting the GDPR principles, we also localize them according to our situations. Zinthu zina sizingateke. Europe ndadenakaindia iku ndesunganene kuti 10,000 in Europe would be the 10,000 in Malawi. They have to be different. Malawi is small. So you do things, you change according to your own country and what you can manage and what you cannot manage. But as long as the main principles stay the same. So what it does, it also adopts those principles because under the GDPR, it's very clear. It says anyone, any data controller or processor who is processing data has to follow 7 fundamental principles. Whatever you do, I'll talk about the principles as well. Now, don't move fast. Let's go to the first slide, still the other slide again. And on top of that, it also gives data subject different rights. You and me, the data subject, it now says you do have rights. So if you have rights, you can enforce on your rights. If anyone processes data contrary to those rights, then you have a case where you can actually report to the Data Protection Authority to actually have it enforced. And over above outlining, providing for those data subject rights, it also gives obligations on the data processors and the data controllers. And over, it also says, okay, MACRA should be the data protection authority. They're in charge of enforcing and monitoring compliance with data protection. They have to make sure that the data controllers and processors are following the fundamental principles. They're processing in line with the principles that are outlined. They are also fulfilling their obligations, but again, the data subjects' rights are not also infringed when the data controllers are processing personal data. Over to the next slide. The next one, I think I've spoken about that. Yeah. So I forgot a most important one. It also says you cannot process personal data of any individual without having a legal basis. And it provides the justifications for which one can actually process personal data. So whatever, if you are a data controller or a processor within the meaning of the Data Protection Act, you cannot process data if the reasons why you are processing is not among the 6 that are there. The first one is consent. First, and consent can be in different ways. So audience, whether it's an international company or whatever, they can only process your personal data if you give consent. So we give it freely. Online. On Facebook or other things, we just say, okay, here we are, tick, 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 click, 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 as long as you are able to access whatever service you want. So you are giving consent. You cannot come back later and say, process data if you gave consent. And the data controller can always say, I'm processing this personal data because they gave me consent. So you have to be mindful on how you give consent. Read and know what you are foregoing before you give your consent. Always remember, the first justification is consent. You give consent, the person can actually go ahead and process your personal data. Remember, the data that identifies you. We're not talking about messages, but the names and other things. I think I'll also talk about that properly. The second one is contract. If you are going kubanki, it's a contractual agreement. If you are getting employed, it's a contractual obligation. I don't want you to have my date of birth, my sex, or other ethnicity. No. Contract, normally, for it, they will always need your personal data. So that is justifiable under the Data Protection Act. And the other justifications, they include legal basis. Nabeleka example ya Airtel. Airtel sana ngofuna kubanga SIM card registration. It was marked that there is a law that says audience amenagulisa ma SIM card, they need to collect personal information ya anthu because it's aimed to protect frauds into zina and to also assist the police in investigations and other things. So again, if there is a law that requires you to provide that personal data, then it is justified. The data controller who's doing it is justified. Chimo's national ID. You cannot have a national ID without giving your personal information. So that's also a legal basis under the Data Protection Act. And sometimes there are also legitimate interest or public interest reasons why personal data can be collected by certain public authorities. Let's say, I'll give an example, census. Census is something that every country needs to do once in a while. And they collect a lot of personal data. That, again, is for public interest. It is something that they can actually say we do have a legal basis on why we are processing this particular personal data. So those are the justifications. So if whatever you're doing, consent wasn't given, it just has to be one. You don't have to have zosezo. Chimozi suffices. But there are certain times and when Namabangabe both, just to cover themselves, especially on the consent. So please, I hope I've made myself clear there that under the Data Protection Act, any data controller can only collect your personal data if they can justify it within those 6 grounds: consent, contract, legal basis, public interest. What's the other one? I can't see, but those are the 6 justifications under the Data Protection Act. Without that, they cannot process your data. So anyone who processes against, contrary to that, is now in breach of the Data Protection Act, and the authority, which is now the MACRA, can enforce against that data controller. Over to the next slide. And I already talked about personal data, what personal data is. But now I want to give like clear examples of what personal data can be and what personal data cannot be. And one of the things that the Data Protection Act introduces, it also produces another set of data, which is a subset of personal data called sensitive data. Sensitive data, basically, is personal data. But because of its sensitivity, if somebody, that data was abused, there will be an discrimination or harm happening to the individual, and the individual should be the only one who should consent to the release of that particular data. So sensitive data is like unique, they're supposed to be guarded. So the name, the sex, where you live, or other things. But when we go to sensitive data, there are certain things like biometrics. Somebody who collects your fingerprints, scan my irises. There are so many ways in which biometrics can actually be collected. They are said to be so sensitive. And there is also, nowadays, sensitive data has also been said to be sexual orientation. We know, not everybody, it's a sensitive issue. So again, that if you are collecting sensitive, you're now doing as the data controller, then basically the reason why they have been differentiated, it goes to how you protect that data. Inai palima standards, minimum standards, the personal data, okay, you need to have these as basic standards. But if you are processing the sensitive data, you need to take a step further. You need to have more security measures to protect that data because it's considered very sensitive. So those are the examples. Political affiliations, there are reasons why people believe that political affiliations are also supposed to be part of the personal data, sensitive data. But remember, we are talking about data that identifies an individual. Over to the next slide. I don't know if you can see clearly there because it's too small. I had a set of other things, but I will just talk about them. There was health, and like these are pieces of information about an individual. Remember, it's an individual. We are not talking about a company. So here, there are like bank details of an individual, car registration number, photo of a colleague, work, email address, national ID, internet IP address, then there's company phone number, locational data, there's voice recording, there's information about a deceased individual, there's WhatsApp messages, there's a personal story, credit score, and other things. And at the back are the passport number, email address, personal email address, then there's company financial reports. So there, if you look at the certain data that has not been classified as personal data, like anonymized survey. I'll talk about anonymized. I think I might as well just do it now. When we say something is anonymized, it basically means it's data that had been scribbled, that it has removed, that you cannot identify anyone from that particular data. So it can be data and hambirimbiri, ordinary personal data, but now you have anonymized it in such a way that mutusangazindikire so kuti uyuyu ndi Togojimbe or uyuyu ndi Shupipiri. It has so much, technology is always possible with, there are so many ways in which you can do that. Once the data has been anonymized, that you cannot recognize the person, it's no longer personal data. And that's why they are saying it's not personal data. And above company phone number. You remember I talked about individuals. A company is not an individual, it's not a living person. Because normally personal data is about a living person, you and me. So it's no longer, it cannot be personal data. So any data, company financial reports, it's just a company financial reports. You cannot identify alias from a financial report, your company. So those are not part of personal data to be protected under the Data Protection Act. But the rest, because an individual can actually be identified, but if you can see and post, you are processing personal data. So we have to really be careful when we are actually trying to enforce. We have to know first what sort of personal data is actually being processed. Like today I'm talking to individuals, so you have to know data processing, what are the rights that will be associated with this. Over to the next slide. It's the same things that I was saying. It's the issue of sensitivity that makes the other sensitive data. And basically what the Data Protection Act says, if you are processing the sensitive data over and above many minor protections that many minor user for your ordinary personal data, you have to have an additional security. Security features, organization features, they have to be extra, so that because it's so sensitive. So basically that's what it does. And normally, so when it comes to the sensitive, more sensitive data, even if you are a company, it's an obligation, you are under a contract or whatever, but when you are processing the more sensitive one, always try to get the consent of the individual so that they know the consent to their sensitive data being processed. Over to the next slide. And the other thing that the Data Protection Act does is it also offers the same higher level of security if you are processing personal data, because kids are considered to be vulnerable and needs to be protected. So you always need to get the consent of their guardians. So if you have if you are kids, just know under the Data Protection Act, your data is considered almost like sensitive data that needs extra protection by whoever collects it. The next slide. I think I also talked about why do we have the separate categorization between personal data, ordinary, and the sensitive data. Possible discrimination that can happen if your data was exposed, the harm, and when you just have to be feeling vulnerable, and we just want them to have extra protection. Remember, it's based on the right of privacy, because in Zina they are considered to be private, and even online, we try to have them as private as possible, unless the individual gives consent to their data being processed. So it's just about greater controls to be employed if you are processing the more sensitive data. Over to the next slide. Now, this is the one that is very important to you and me today. You should know what the data subject, as a data subject, what your rights are under the Data Protection Act. And basically, these are the rights General Data Protection Regulation EU. So what it does is, if you look at it, it says, first of all, you have a right to access. Whether, regardless of whatever reason, the legal basis, but if somebody is collecting your personal data, you have a right to say, I want to access my data, my personal data. Regardless of the reason why, you need to be able to access to your personal data so that you know the amount and the nature of personal data that has been collected. The right to restriction. Once you see it, you should be able to say, I did a process. As long as it doesn't contradict this into Zina, you also have to be reasonable. So you can't do that. Retirement age, so there are certain rights. It's absolutely, you cannot say you can. Certain rights are supposed to be the reason why it was collected. But there are others. It's a must that they cannot derogate from. So the right to access, you still have to access. But restriction, there are certain data yoti sunganene ngadabeka kunchito ija. Ugwira nchito nkudatene zaka zangai. You can't say that. Panga collect census uvekera mudisindufuna ndinene. But you know there's a reason why the census is. So, but for other things, you can demand, restrict, collecting if it doesn't have anything to do with the purpose for which we didn't get data. The same objecting, your person, maga objecting, when it comes to online, getting your personal data for direct marketing. You can say, no, I don't want, don't use my personal data for direct marketing. So you also have a right to object to certain things like that. The right to be informed, that's a must as well. They have to tell you why are they collecting your data, what sort of data is actually being collected, what are they going to use it from? Are they going to give it to any third parties? So that is information that is a must. That you have a right to be informed about the data that is being processed by the data controller or the processor. And the other thing is the right to prevent automatic processing, normally called profiling. That again, you have a right. If you know what your data is being used, you know what profiling is? It's basically using technology to predict certain things and to do certain things, even to make a decision about you, but using machines or artificial learning, artificial intelligence. So you have a right to say, no, I don't want to be profiled. But remember, Tagamba's right of information, and if they're going to use, do any profiling, they're supposed to tell you. So at that point, you can choose, I don't want decisions about me to be made by machines. So that, again, you have a right to. The right to rectification, if there is anything, when you look at your data and it's not right, you can have it, you have a right to demand that it be corrected. And erasure, there are times where a contract has ended or the data is no longer needed. You have a right to demand that they erase it, that it shouldn't be there anymore. That is a right you also have. The right to data portability. Normally, like my banks, the information that they collect is the same. So if you want to move from one bank to the other bank, what the Data Protection Act says is you can tell your bank, that's what portability is all about. Transferring your personal data to somebody else, of course, with your consent. And again, to withdraw consent, you remember, palima situations then as the first is consent. At any point, you gave your consent, but you don't feel comfortable about the data is being processed. As long as it's you can always withdraw your consent at any moment. So you also have that right. So if you feel your personal data has been processed and any of those rights, Penabage has been infringed, you have a right to lodge a complaint against that data controller or processor. Over to the next one. And I also said that it also says for the data controllers now, it's not for you, but for the data controllers. It adopts the general data protection principles. What it's saying is like there are 7 principles that data controller or processor. The first thing is storage limitation. Once they collect your personal data, they don't have to keep it forever. At some point, they have to get rid of that data because it's personal data and it's sensitive. And again, the other one is integrity and confidentiality. They have an obligation every time they're processing data to always make sure that the data is always secure, that they employ the right measures to make sure they are put in security features so that the data cannot be easily breached or accessed. The other thing is accountability. They always have to be accountable in terms of they have to be able to say, this is why we are collecting the data. The 6 justifications that I had mentioned, they have to say, okay, this one we got consent. They should be able to say, if somebody comes and say, why were you collecting this data? They should be able to point on the 6, which one is applicable to them as the basis for which they collected, the process, the data. Lawful, fair, and transparent, I think these are things that are my principles. When you are processing data, be honest on the reasons why everything, why we're doing it, and do it in a manner that is fair. Accuracy. You always have to make sure that the data, if you are collecting personal data, it's always accurate. You've discovered that you have wrong information, you always have to make sure that it's updated and corrected. Purpose limitation is basically saying that if you are collecting data for the sake, I'll mention telecom again, for the sake of providing telecommunication services, SIM card. And I collect data manager because your understanding is for the use of you to phone. If they start trying to take that data, this is outside the purpose for which they got it, then it becomes a problem. So what that principle basically says that if you're collecting personal data, use it for the purpose for which you have actually collected it from. Then they need to go back. No, panopo sisi zukuza naso ndinga kanali under contract, it was a legal basis, but if they want to send it to a third party, they need to come back to you and ask you for your consent. I hope I'm making myself clear there. And again, data minimization is also a very important principle. While they're processing the data, they always need to make sure that they just get enough to fulfill their purposes. They don't have no, it has to be to the minimum for use. So data minimization principle basically means collect enough for what you are doing and always don't get too much, just enough that is relevant to why you are collecting it for. Next one, I think I've covered them already. Yeah, I think I've already talked about that purpose, limitation, yes. Next one, I've already spoken about that. Minimization, I've also spoken. Accuracy, storage, I think we also covered that. Security of personal data, one of the things that the Data Protection Act is clear, it actually mandates that data controllers, process data, they need to have not just technical but organization measures in place to ensure that the data is secure. So organization, we basically mean technical is also good, and the two-factor authentication, the encryption, those are technical measures. But when we talk about organization measures, we're talking about as able to access. They should be their human resource. Then our human resource as it's process personal data. There should be a way in which as it's access data. Those are just organization arrangements. You should have a policy in place on how people can access personal data. Those are part of the organizational measures. Training is part of an organization measure. Okay, we are now processing personal data, which is now a regulated field. We need people to know the Data Protection Act when it comes to processing or accessing personal data. So those are just the examples that I was giving. But again, backup systems where person breach, at least have backup that you can recover personal data. But backup, it's more like a technical measure as well. Next one, record keeping. This is another requirement that is actually being imposed in the Data Protection Act. Over and above the record that I was talking about, it says that you have to maintain records of all employees who are involved in any data processing activities. Now the data processing activities, not just the personal data, security, but you need to have records access. And access in how why were they accessing it? So that breach, you have an audit who was processing that personal data. So that's also a requirement now under the data protection laws for those data controllers or processors. Next one. Now, I think I won't talk much about data controllers because I've already said it. So data controllers basically are the people who collect the data. But can we move to the next one where I should just talk on the obligations now that they have? So what the Data Protection Act now does, it actually outlines, provides for different obligations that if you are a data processor or a controller, first of all, you need to provide information, information about how, why, how are you going to use the information, how long for, where. Those are the things that now the data controller, it's a must, they have to do. And another thing is when they are processing certain information, personal data, now they'll be required to do what is called a data protection impact assessment, just to assess the impact. Data get ahead, what are the risks that are involved, so that if they are going to go ahead and process it, at least they already know the risk. And they have taken measures to mitigate against those risks. So if they don't do that and they're doing like the profiling, now they'll be contradicting the Data Protection Act. Another thing is adopting the organization and the technical measures. I think we've already talked about that. I won't go much about it. To ensure compliance with the provision. So basically I'm saying, make sure you have the justified reason, you are processing in line with the guidelines and my principles. I mentioned 7, could all your processing is done in line with the 7 principles, and you are justified in how you are processing the data. And over and above, if you are a data controller who have an agreement with a third party, make sure you have agreements that make sure my data processing principles or provisions are not infringed. So that agreement also has to be in place. Another thing is if there is a breach, you need to report to the data authority, especially if it involves my personal data. And so you need to involve my data subjects and the data has been breached and the likely consequences or the impact that it might have on them and what you're doing about it. So that is also very important under the Data Protection Act. The other one that is also very important is to designate a data protection authority, but the designation of the data protection authority, it's only for those data controllers or processors that are considered to be of significant importance. They don't necessarily need the data protection officer, but if you are processing personal data, I think it's about 10,000 personal data, you are processing sensitive data, there are ways in which the Data Protection Act has said you become a significant data controller. And if once you are designated a significant data controller of importance, then you need to have a data protection officer. That's where I also wanted to talk to you about. Ladies, this is a new field that you can now,